funny thing is, about a month ago, I was talking to someone and they said, I said, hey, did you, you know, dial into my apocalypse webinar? And they said, like, which one? Because this is now my third webinar of the year that's called Apocalypse. That tells you how 2020 is going for ad tech. With the cookie apocalypse, the COVID apocalypse, now we're in IDFA apocalypse. So I probably need a something that's worse than an apocalypse to start describing the latest in news. All right, we only have 15 minutes, so I'm going to jump in. So this is supposed to be a factual presentation, not an opinion presentation. So I mean, I have opinions, but I'll just kind of run through the facts as I know them about IDFA and what Apple announced, because the announcement was at WWDC, and I think in the last 2-3 weeks since then, there's been a lot of work, but it's mostly been dominated by the tech side of the house. And so I've spent a little time trying to like understand it at a more granular level as it relates to product, business, etc. So that's what I hope to accomplish in this 15 minutes. Introduction, you all know me, so I'm not going to introduce myself. I've been doing this for a long time. All right, this is what was announced. This shouldn't probably be new to anybody, but there were really 4 parts of the announcement at WWDC as related to privacy and related issues. The foremost is that apps are going to have to ask for permission to use the IDFA, which is used very extensively in advertising currently. The IDFA, I assume everyone knows what it is. It's the persistent identifier that, that is used in apps for advertising. Secondly, apps are now going to have a nutrition label explaining what data is being used, as well as what SDKs they include. It's not really clear if this is going to be used for any sort of enforcement or other activities, or if it's just for consumer awareness, but it's worth noting. Third, Safari is now going to include a ghostery-like feature for any of you who have used Ghostery, which will allow you to see all the trackers that are being fired in the browser. It's sort of a little bit moot since Safari blocks the cookies in those trackers. So you'll see trackers, but it won't really tell you anything interesting. And then last is consumers will be allowed to provide less accurate location data when providing an app with location data. So the example here is that some apps, like say Pokemon Go, need to know exactly where you are with precise latitude and longitude because they overlay a map on the user experience. Whereas other apps like weather just need to know what city you're in. They really don't need to know your latitude and longitude. So this option is being rolled out, and this is probably the option that we've seen the least spoken about, but it has potentially a big impact. Now, those are the facts. Maybe I missed something, but I think those are the facts. What we know as well, we can know from previous releases, is that this will come out in production sometime in September. I think that's the pattern of every previous release, is it'll come out in the second half of September, but also that it will be adopted quite quickly. So I looked up the stats, and for the last 2 releases, they both achieved over 50% penetration by November of the same year. So Apple devices tend to auto-update, unlike Android. So I think we should expect something similar, where this is very widespread by November of this year, probably up to 80–90% by the beginning of 2021. So that gives you a sense. This is the new normal starting in the second half of this year. Okay, so I'm really going to spend 99% of the rest of the presentation on the IDFA issue as opposed to the other issues. So apps have to ask for permission to use the IDFA. So this is an important point. When you think about the app and the app developer's perspective, it's not that they just continue doing business as usual and either they get the IDFA or not. There is a API that the app needs to call to ask for permission. Say, hey, I need the IDFA. If they don't ask for permission, they're not going to get it. So they won't get it until they ask. There's a couple of detailed implications around this that I had to do some research over the weekend about, and I thank you to the people who participated in one of my Twitter threads to help learn about this. So first of all, it is a one-time ask. So the app developer can ask, the user can say yes or no, and then the app developer cannot ask again. So the user will not be hit once a week, once a month with an ask. It will be one time only. If the user, if you want to ask the user again, you have to hope for them to uninstall and reinstall. So that's pretty important. So that means that ask has to be timed and made in a way that the consumer will really have a good experience and potentially have a high likelihood of saying yes. Now, there was some contradictory information about this subject, but doing more research and downloading the beta, the users can opt in later in their settings screen. So there's a dedicated settings screen as shown on the right side of this page that the user can go into and opt in or opt out after the first ask. So it is possible that an app could ask, and then a week or two later, if they don't get it, they can say, hey, you know, you're not giving us permission, so navigate to your settings screen and enable us. It's a little bit awkward. It probably will have a low take-up rate, but it is possible to ask. The third bullet's kind of an interesting one that I think will have a very big impact. So existing installed apps will be opted out until they ask for permission. So what does this mean? Your phone is filled with apps that are using your IDFA right now, presumably showing you ads. As soon as you upgrade to iOS 14, all those apps will be disabled. They will have zeros instead of IDFAs. So user installs, and you're going to see a precipitous decline in IDFA from that user. And then once those apps are updated, so they're new installs of those apps, that's when they can start asking for permission, which means probably the big ad-supported apps will be aware of this and they'll have versions ready for iOS 14 on the day iOS 14 releases, but long-tail apps may not. So we might see a very precipitous drop in IDFAs in the middle of September as people start upgrading, and then it'll start gradually coming back as apps start asking for permission. That's an important point, that the existing apps will be opted out. This is also one of the reasons why I've heard from a number of people who've downloaded the beta of iOS that they're not seeing the alert. The reason is because their apps aren't asking them for permission yet. So you can upgrade to the beta like I did this weekend, but you won't see the alerts until the apps are updated. Next, the IDFV, which is a different ID, which I don't think I've ever heard talked about in the advertising community until this week, is available for use across apps owned by the same company. So the IDFV is, you could think of it like a first-party cookie. Basically, if you as a company have 5 or 6 apps, they can share the same IDFV, which will allow you to do promotions across those users. It is possible that the IDFV will be used for advertising purposes, similar to the way a lot of companies are using first-party cookies now as a replacement for third-party cookies in the browser environment. In that environment, it's not really a tracker. It's much more used for very tactical things like frequency capping and DMP integrations. So there is a kind of analogous sort of data on the app to what's being done in the browser. So the next point, I'll bring this up in further, is that there's some interesting language in the policies about the SDKs that are not used for ads, but are used for ads in other contexts need permission. Let's talk about that later. Let's hold on to that concept because I'm a little confused about it. All right, so that's the facts about the IDFA. The second portion of the technology that's been announced is this thing called Scad network or Scad network. I don't know how to pronounce it. And this is a technology that Apple will support that basically allows for some measure of conversion tracking in a very limited way. So how it works. First of all, ad networks, and this is Apple's phrase. Apple calls them ad networks. I get a sense it's a little bit of a pejorative here. You know, they don't say DSPs, they don't say SSPs, they don't say technology providers. They call us all ad networks. So welcome to the ad network crew. Everyone on this call is now an ad network. So they let ad networks register to get postbacks about installation generated through clicks. That's basically the heart of it. Beeswax or another customer, we could register as an ad network with Apple, and we get click information. I'm sorry, we get conversions based on clicks. The app publisher then needs to register all ad networks in advance for them to be eligible. So think of it as you're publishing an app, you have 5 SDKs in your app for monetization, you're gonna register those. Now, once again, Apple sort of has with a real misunderstanding about how the advertising ecosystem works. So they think the SDKs are the only ones who might serve ads on your app. So they think of the publisher will be able to know in advance everyone who might serve an ad. So that's going to be a pretty big limitation to overcome for a DSP or a buyer who wants to get these postbacks. The SDK then needs to register the creatives as they're served. So once again, it's very SDK dependent. Not clear how a DSP would do that. But the SDK needs to say, hey, this is a creative from this advertiser. And then within 24 hours, Apple will do a post back to that ad network, whoever that ad network is. And it'll tell you someone installed, the day the ad was shown, and a number between 1 and 100, which represents the campaign. This is pretty confusing, and I have a slide on everything we don't know about this, but basically this is Apple's solution, which is sort of, it's like they threw you a life preserver and it hit you in the head and you drowned. The last 4 slides, I'll talk about what we don't know. And I'll go through these in some depth. So what don't we know? User experience. The biggest question is, what's the opt-in rate going to be? And how are publishers going to use the incentives to get it there? There are people online who are saying it's going to be 1%. IDFA is dead, dead, dead. No one's going to see an IDFA again. And there are other people who think it'll be 50, 60, 70%. I don't know. You don't know. No one knows. But that's the biggest question. How are apps going to incentivize opt-in? Will it be that you get extra functionality? Will it be a plea to come on, help us out? Will it be something else? Will they be able to remove functionality from users who don't opt in, and how aggressive can they be? So the question here is, like, first of all, what is an app publisher willing to do? Because obviously if you don't give a user an option to use your product without an opt-in, they may uninstall it and then you've lost the user. And you won't have an opportunity to monetize them through in-app purchases and all that other stuff, right? So that's the first general question. But there's also a really big question, which is the App Store has policies, and Apple has historically been very aggressive about using its policies to bend the will of the industry to do whatever it wants. Will the Apple App Store have policies around what you can do here? Because I haven't heard of any of them. I looked, their App Store policies are not updated for iOS 14. The latest update is from last March. So this is a big unknown. Maybe if you incentivize opt-in or you remove that functionality, they will ban your app. Don't know. Big question. That will have a big effect on the opt-in rates for sure. Okay, related to this, enforcement. This is the biggest thing I'm confused about. So Apple has a docs page that explains what tracking is and how it will be enforced. And then they separately have their API pages. And there's a really big disconnect between the two. So on the apps pages, all they talk about is IDFA and whether you get it or not. That's the whole, so from a technical perspective, it's the only thing they're implementing is this IDFA capability. But on their general description of this feature about what tracking includes and why you need to opt in for tracking, it's wildly broader. So they call tracking, which requires opt-in, to include sharing emails, advertising IDs, or other IDs with a third-party ad network. So what does that mean? Like, let's say that I have an app and the user says, don't share my IDFA. Fine, okay. But then they use single sign-on with Google or Facebook, and then I want to allow Google or Facebook to show ads on my page. Doesn't look like you can do that. But how would Apple enforce that? Also, when we think about identity solutions like LiveRamp, and you get hashed email, how are you allowed to pass that to third parties? It doesn't appear that you are, according to the policy. But once again, this isn't a policy, there's a marketing page. This isn't in the APIs, and it's very unclear how Apple would try to enforce this, whether they would enforce this, or what would happen if you started passing strings of letters and numbers on the RTB request. Would they know? I don't know. I don't know if Apple really even knows what RTB is, to be totally frank, based on the Scad network protocol. And then what about IP addresses and fingerprinting? So I would assume that Apple would be unhappy about using IP addresses or fingerprinting to identify the users, but it's not in their policies, and it's very unclear what would happen if a SDK started passing that data. So unknown is a big unknown. The Scad network. The Scad network, like I pointed out when I was going over it, is kind of designed for a environment that doesn't match the real environment. So it's designed for an environment where SDKs represent ad networks, full stop, and they're the only ones who advertise in the apps. I think we all know in the real environment, first of all, there are MMPs, and second of all, there are RTB participants. And Scad network doesn't fit either of those models. So MMPs currently, in the current environment, an MMP is providing conversion attribution for an app or for a marketer. And the way it works, I think everyone knows, is that you have the IDFA on the impression, right? So the impression is shown, we have the IDFA, and then the user clicks, the IDFA is past the MMP, and then the user goes to the App Store, installs the app, and the IDFA is seen again by the MMP, and those two IDFAs are matched. So what that means is that the opt-in rate for IDFA has to be squared effectively. You need an opt-in on both the app that showed the ad and the app that installed the ad. So if the average opt-in rate is say 40%, 40% times 40%, you end up with a 16% match rate on MMPs on Apple. That's pretty bad. So there are a lot of questions for MMPs. One is, how are they going to get the opt-in on first install? So they want to get it as soon as possible after the user installs. But as we talked 2 slides ago, it will be, the app providers are going to be very careful about when they ask for the IDFA permission to maximize the ability to get it, which is probably not on first install. You don't want someone to install the app and suddenly get a warning. You want to wait until they see some value. So that's a problem. The second question in general is, will marketers continue to use MMPs if they're only getting a very partial view of the user? I don't know. And the second thing is, will they use Scad network? So, so in the definition of Scad network, Apple wants, I'm going to keep using air quotes, ad networks to be notified when someone installs. But an MMP is not an ad network. MMP is a attribution solution that works with marketers. So if an ad, let's say a simple example, the marketer sends a creative ad to an ad network, like, I don't know, like AppLovin. AppLovin has an SDK, shows the ad. Which of those two parties controls who gets notified by Apple? Is it the MMP chosen by that advertiser, or is it AppLovin in that example? And AppLovin's going to want to be notified because they have to optimize. So it's very unclear. Secondly, how is Scad network going to be adapted for RTB? So in the RTB example, there's a DSP, let's say Beeswax. So Beeswax has a customer, let's say there's no MMP to make it simple. So the customer goes to Beeswax, wants to advertise on AppLovin as on an RTB basis. I'm not picking on AppLovin, they're just the first one that came to mind. So Beeswax, we want to know when the user got a conversion, right? So we're the ones who want to be the ad network according to Apple's definition. We serve an ad, we bid on an auction to AppLovin. We have to somehow pass them our data about what call to make from the creative to register us. AppLovin needs to pick it up and call register us as the ad network. The OpenRTB protocol doesn't have any way to do that. Like, are we going to use an extension? Not, I don't know. And by the way, AppLovin may prefer that they're the ad network in this case, just from a point of view of getting more data. So they may not participate. We started to see the MMP send around, data and documents. So I got an email from Singular.net on Friday suggesting that the MMP should be the ad network, which is maybe true, I don't know. And we've been in contact with all the exchanges and SSPs we work with who have SDKs, ask them what they think. I also talked to the IAB Tech Lab, and they said they're setting up a call or some sort of working group to figure this stuff out. But adapting Scad network to the real environment we live in, not the one Apple imagined, is a big lift, and it's not clear at all how to do it. So, fun. Last slide before we take questions, so get your Q&A ready. Strategic implications. So the big one is, what's Apple going to do? Like, nobody knows. What's Google going to do? Nobody knows, right? Second one is, what's the effect going to be on Google and Facebook? So they have SDKs that appear to be in the crosshairs for Apple's policies, and they also have SSO. Could you SSO without an opt-in? I don't know. It's very unclear. Will SSO just stop working unless the user opts in to IDFA? It kind of seems that way, but I don't want to call that because that seems like too big a change. And then lastly, the one we didn't talk about this at all in this call is the lat long imprecision. So that seems like a big deal for in-store traffic. Walk-through attribution will be declined. I mean, if you think of weather as probably the #1 use of lat long data, and now it won't be available, that makes a big difference. Wow, I really went over my 15 minutes. Sorry about that.
We'll let you do it anytime you want to come back. All right, okay. So as Ari said, get your Q&A ready. We do have some already in the hopper here. But before I let you guys ask him questions, I want to remind you, as I said in the chat, the next 15 minutes of Beeswax session is why aren't DSPs more sassy? So that's this Thursday, 7/16, 12 p.m. And check the chat for the link to sign up for that. It's going to be an interesting one. All right, so let's dive into the first question. I'll rattle them off order which they received. Do you view the ad tracking consent as simply restricting access to the IDFA, or as restricting all ad tracking related to that user, i.e. hashed email, universal IDs, etc.? What happens if a different consent in the app login conflicts with the ad tracking consent?
Yeah, exactly. So the first question I think I answered in this presentation, which is I have no idea. So Apple seems to say that it should apply to everything, and that there's some sort of like honor system that apps should not pass anything if they don't get IDFA consent. I don't know. The second part of it is interesting, which is like, if you get IDFA consent, let's say you say yes, do you still need to pop a GDPR consent, or are you clear? I mean, there's different layers of consent that you could say. This could potentially, if you acknowledge that the user gave you consent to share the data and there's a link to your privacy policy, maybe you could skip GDPR consent and other consents. Talk to your lawyer.
Interesting. Okay, next one. If ID's removed, how real is the risk of blocking publisher and ad tech attempts to pass alternative IDs or data through the bitstream? For example, you mentioned Beeswax uses ATS. What is the risk that ATS could be blocked by platforms, mobile or browser?
Right. So this is sort of another variation on the same question. I don't know is the short answer. I think it's possible that Apple could be super aggressive and they could just basically block all RTB requests if the user doesn't opt in. Or they could block all suspicious requests. It's very unclear what they plan on doing. I really want to see their update to their app store policies before I kind of start trying to guess about what they're going to do. But if you look at their developer page, not the API page, but the more higher level developer page, the one that's like what we announced at WWDC, it's pretty scary what they say. They're basically saying like, you're shit out of luck if someone doesn't opt in.
Okay. What is the criteria that Apple will choose to decide if an SDK is ad related or not?
What is the criteria? So what they said was that that they were targeting SDKs that are generally used for advertising, but we're not showing ads on that particular app. So analytics ads. So my guess would be that they're going to focus on, apps from big, well-known advertising companies, namely Google, Facebook, Twitter, etc. Yahoo, has Flurry analytics, and that'll be the main criteria. But it could, I don't really know.
Okay, I did see a raised hand, but I think whoever raised their hand put the hand down. So if you do want to ask a question live, go ahead and raise your hand again. It'll be fun. All right, next question. What information/attributes does the postback contain?
The postback, well, first of all, it's pretty well documented, so I would Google Scad network. But basically, you have to register a campaign ID, which is a number between 1 and 100. Thanks, Apple. That really conforms to the way people do business. So it's a random number from 1 and 100. It tells you the app you're advertising, so the advertiser name, and the app it was advertised on. It will give you a timestamp which is intentionally vague within 24 hours. So sometime yesterday, someone saw an ad on this app and did something. And then they did provide some more flexibility about the actual conversion event. So they allow for multiple kind of funnel-like conversion events. So if someone installs and then later they put money into an account, you can track that.
Okay. All right, we're gonna take a chance and promote someone to panelists here.
Okay.
All right, so Tony Zara, you should be popping up here. I can unmute you. Go ahead and ask your question whenever your audio is connected.
Yeah, so I'm just curious what the end game is for Apple here. They seem to be losing browser share as they are Oh, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Loud,
Okay,
loud
great.
and clear.
Okay, just curious what the end game is for Apple here, what your thoughts are on what the end game is. They seem to be losing browser share as they are getting more aggressive.
Yeah, I think once again, I wanted to concentrate on the facts in this presentation, so it is a little bit of a speculation question. But I'll say that Apple has a view of the world that there should be less ads, there should be less data, it should be more of a kind of a high-end premium experience, and so I think the biggest move in this area was last year when they announced Arcade. So Arcade is a paid ad-free gaming experience that they released last year. It's kind of like Netflix for games. And I think that anything they can do to stamp out the independent ad-supported world and move people to Arcade and to Apple News and other things like that benefits their services orientation.
All right, thank you. Let me change it back to attendee. Okay, going down to the next question. I do think you covered some of this, but just to make sure, this is a question. Thank you for the presentation, which is clear now. This is from Apple and active in Apple devices. What about the Android devices? Are there any such plans from Google for Android?
Yeah, like I said, I have no idea. I think that I think that it's not soon would be my guess. Like, I think we'd be talking about 2021. And it's also not clear if Google would follow Apple's approach or would do something, similar to what they were trying to do with the sandbox to try to kind of balance the needs of the advertising community and the non-advertising community. So I have no idea.
Okay, we have way more questions than we have time for, so I'm going to kind of jump around.
Fast, lightning round.
Yeah, some of these you did already cover, so I'm going to skip some of those. Sorry to those who asked those questions. You can always email us though, and you can email marketing@beeswax.com, and I'll make sure it gets to Ari. Let's see, let's get a more recent one. IDFV appears to be a potential solution for publishers who own multiple apps. Is the RTB community able to look this up in the bid stream?
Yeah, so IDFV, like I mentioned, is kind of a first-party cookie. There's no reason that SDKs from the exchanges couldn't start passing IDFV as an alternative way of identifying the user. It won't work across apps, though. So it's as good as a first-party cookie, which is pretty limited. You can use it for frequency capping and session depth within a given app, which is helpful. And you could potentially use it for some first-party data segmentation, like is being used by certain vendors in the browser community. So yeah, I'd encourage IDFV to start getting passed on the RTB request.
Okay, let's see, something about fingerprinting. Most DSPs seem to be automatically falling back on fingerprinting for attribution. Is there any guarantee fingerprinting will have any level of quality? Yeah,
so fingerprinting is a dirty word, but it's being used pretty widely throughout the advertising community. In-app is actually an opportunity to get a lot of signals that are useful for fingerprinting because you have an SDK, so you have more signals. In a browser, like in a Safari browser, you have very few signals. So I think that some form of fingerprinting, whether it just be IP address or something more significant, is likely to be used by DSPs for some measure of identification of users.
Okay, I'm going to take two more questions. First one, how is location data being proposed to be made generalized? Aggregation to zip code/city, rounded off at lat-long coordinates?
I don't know. I have seen no data about this. So that's a very good question. I'd love to know. I'd love to know how it's being, how an app sees the data if the user decides to be less precise. And second question really for the IAB is how whether the RTB request will have some sort of note that it is less precise, because I believe there is a location type field in the open RTB request, and that should be used in this case.
Okay. And then the last one, at the end of this presentation, can you please reconfirm what exactly will happen when iOS 14 is installed on an individual's phone before the individual's app is updated? Did you say that IDFA will go to zeros immediately upon installation of iOS 14? Okay.
Yeah, so that's a great way to finish it. Let's summarize. User installs iOS 14, mid-September it'll start, right? On that day, any app that has not been updated will get all zeros for IDFA. So there will be no IDFA for existing apps on that user's phone. As those apps are updated for iOS 14, they will continue to get these zeros until they ask for permission. And if they get permission, they will start sending the IDFA. That is what's going to happen. those work.
All right. Well, that's a good place to stop. I want to thank Ari for joining us today. This is really informative, helpful. Even if there's a lot we don't know, now we know what we don't know. So hopefully we can all hound Apple with these questions, get some answers. In the meantime, I'd like to thank all of you for joining. Hope everyone's staying safe, staying healthy. And we'll be back on Thursday for 15 minutes with Beeswax. Why aren't DSPs more sassy? I'll see you then.
So long.